Okay.
I mean, I'm mad, but
Thank you, Mike. We're recording right now. People don't need to hear that.
okay.
All right, everybody. Welcome to our weekly webinar. I'm going to share with you a little bit of history on something. And in fact, let me share my screen to get into this. We're going to talk about New England, and we're also going to talk about the Mountain State. I'm not New England. What I was saying.
I was going to say that was last week.
Welcome to this week. Leave me alone. No, we're gonna talk about the busyness crisis. This was a hot topic back in the 80s, and it would probably be worth just doing a quick review why this is such a big deal in terms of demographics. Now, a lot of people don't know this. I've been doing this kind of stuff for a very long time, and I know you think I'm in my late 30s. Well, I'm older than that. Anyway, what is this? There was a time in which organized dentistry was very concerned about how many providers there were per population. The American Medical Association was also concerned, the American Veterinary Medical Association and optometric associations. So believe it or not, I got involved in trying to figure out how it is you determine how many people there should be in any unit of space to say, is there enough room for one more? And at the time, let's just go back to dentistry, they had a rule of thumb that if there were 3,500 people, well, that would be about right per dentist. Well, the thing is, right now, that's silly. It actually, in the United States currently, it's between 1,200 and 1,400 to 1, means there's sufficient room for one more if you have a middle-class population. And I bring that up because here's the deal. You know, what people were thinking is there is some kind of a figure that you can always go to, and if you can get to that, well, fantastic, then there's enough room. But what they weren't thinking about is the demographic component. Are the people who are there likely to go to a dentist or not? If you have more money, more education, you tended to live in a single-family dwelling and you had good credit, that vastly improved the likelihood that you're going to seek regular dental care. Now, I was the one who came up with that formula, and not only the ratio, but also came up with the parameters to do that. And ever since that time, and it's been more than 30 years, people have been using my figures. And I've done these and updated them every year for all of these professions. The reason Dr. Demographics is a little unique is because, frankly, I'm the one who kind of came up with the original algorithms for what busyness was. I bring it up because some people get the idea that, oh, this state or that state is oversaturated. There's just too many people, too many professionals fighting for the same population. And you know, the truth is that's not really true. What you're looking for is a population that is going to be likely to go into the professional office. This, by the way, is especially true right now of veterinarians, because we know that there are certain lifestyles of people who are much more inclined to go to a veterinarian than others. And so it changes the calculus a great deal. So that is what the busyness crisis is all about. I bring it up because many of the states I'm going to talk about now, everybody is going to say, oh my gosh, they're too crowded. Let's talk about the real potential of these locations and why I think the Rocky Mountain states actually have some pretty good potential, even though almost everybody who watches this presentation are going to go, Scott, there's just too many people. All right. I'm sorry, that is not New England. This is the Rocky Mountain states. Forgive me. Here are the 6 states: Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. Some people think that we should include New Mexico and Arizona because the Rockies touch them. Well, the simple truth is they're not really Rocky Mountain states, and we'll talk about them separately. So as we're looking at the Rocky Mountain states, the reason that these are so important is because they've got so many positive demographic characteristics. If you're going to purchase, it's worth spending a little bit more in many of these states. And it's also worth considering starting up in many of the locations because the amount of growth happening is crazy high. Now, the only real exception to this is Montana and maybe Wyoming. The thing is, these are wonderful states, great outdoor recreation, but they just don't have that much that's drawn them in. Now, here's the thing I want you to understand. If you're really thinking about the Rocky Mountain states and you're going, you know, I just love the mountains or the outdoor recreation or whatever, and I have to admit, they're frankly fantastic. But if you want to go into these areas, you have to remember there's a lot of empty space in every one of these states. And therefore, you have to go to the city centers or the centers of population in order to find a practice for sale. Or if you want to do a startup, you have to be a little more careful about how much growth there is to see if you reach that threshold of how many people you need. I hope that all makes sense. Now, why in the world am I bringing up these mountain states, the Rocky Mountain states in particular? It's because they are growing crazy fast, and they're also growing in a remarkable way in terms of the jobs and the income. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about them. Now, usually when you're looking at the Rocky Mountain states, you don't look at just the state, you look at the market. So as an example, there are markets or clusters of cities within each of these that are going to be good. If you looked at Denver, it's only got about 650,000 people in Denver, the city. But if you look at greater Denver, there's over 3,445,000. Las Vegas isn't just Las Vegas. It includes several cities that are in that cluster, which are, more than 2 million. Salt Lake City, 1,157,000. And by the way, that's a little bit low as far as the estimate. Colorado Springs, Boise, Ogden, Provo-Orem, Fort Collins, Colorado, and Boulder, Colorado. Don't get the idea that it is the city you're looking for. It's the market. And what you're also going to find is almost all of these have a ring or a circle around them. And it's in that circle that your greatest opportunities for practice purchase, and most especially startup, are going to be found. Now remember, our purpose in this webinar is to figure out, where do I put a practice? And with Mike's help, we figure out how do you market it? So with that in mind, let me just point out Denver for a second. Now, I'm not in love with the city of Denver, by the way. There's a lot of things that's kind of made it sort of seedy, and I'm not loving it. However, if you look on the outskirts of Denver, it's a series of lots of cities. And if you found a practice in Littleton, you kind of go, that's a nice place. Thornton, same thing, even Brighton. Boulder is a good place. But the city in itself isn't the do-all, end-all. You have to look at it as a region. Most people, by the way, consider outlying areas that may be as far away as 20 to 30 minutes, like Greeley and Loveland, are still in that greater Denver market. And that's because they get their television and radio signals from Denver itself. So I think you get the idea that when you're looking for a place to put a practice, the reason that we're looking at these outlying areas is because, like I said, they're growing, and they're growing more affluent. Now let's talk about how much growth. Obviously, Montana, as I mentioned, is not the fastest growing state. It's about the 21st in the country, which puts it right in the middle. That's fine. Wyoming, as I mentioned, is also not growing spectacularly well because its base population wasn't that big to start. But I'm going to show you where in Wyoming there is growth. However, we then go to Idaho, which is showing crazy good growth, 5th highest this year in terms of growth, dropped down from number 1, with 23.61% growth. But it's not all of Idaho that's growing. I'll show you where it's growing in just a second. Colorado, as I said, is continuing to be a pretty good growth state, and with 20.81%, 9th fastest growing. But who's moving to Colorado? The type of people who is moving to Colorado isn't what there used to be. The people who are moving here are primarily moving from out of state, often from California. That's because Californians think that Colorado is a lot like home, and in some ways it is, which is changing the political landscape of Colorado. It used to be a little bit more conservative state, and now there's a serious liberal push, which is changing the tax rates in Colorado, as I'll display in a second. Utah is the second fastest growing state in the country, 27.98%. But it's not all of Utah that is growing. There are, in fact, counties within Utah that are shrinking. And then Nevada all of a sudden boomed. 38.2%, number one growth state in the United States. But I'm not suggesting you say, wow, I need to go to Winnemucca and Wendover. Yeah, no, that's not where you want to go in Nevada. Where you want to go in Nevada, well, we'll talk about it in a second. But the thing that I want you to understand, these states are the ones that are showing the greatest growth, but they're also showing very good business development and how much people are able to keep. So we'll talk about the economic impact. So let's just say in the United States, you have a dollar, our regular current currency. Now, if you have a dollar, in goods and services in Montana, you're getting $1.05 for every dollar you spend. So in other words, the cost of living in Montana is very low. And because the taxes are low, and because you're not spending a lot, well, it's a good place to go. It's the sixth lowest cost of living in the country. Wyoming, fourth lowest. And again, you have $1.04 in Wyoming. Very good. Idaho, $1.07, which means it's a really good place to go. Sixth lowest. Colorado, I should have said it's about 97 cents. It's the 19th highest place for cost of living. Colorado is not bad, but there are parts of it that are much more expensive. And when I say parts of it, I'm talking Greater Denver. Colorado Springs is much better. If you go to Utah, it's $1.03, fifth lowest cost of living, and Nevada, $1.02, 10th lowest. Now, why move to Nevada at all? It's hot. There's gambling, yeah. But here's why. Cost of living is crazy low. And you can buy a very nice house, and it's right next door to California. Now, Nevada is not just one place. It's several markets, but most especially Clark County in the south. And of course, there's Reno, Sparks, and Carson City up in the north. Those are doing particularly well because they're right up against California, and the demand has been very high. So let's talk about these states. I want to actually go through this, so you may want to kind of take out a little bit of something to write some notes. If you're going to go to Montana, the only places to go, really, are those that are major big cities like Helena. Bozeman, good place to go. But you see, there's only 4 or 5 markets within Montana that are going to be worth considering. So if you're saying, I want to go to Montana, you have to say, hello, Scott, let's do a consultation. And I can tell you where right now there's the most growth and there's the most money in the state. But because, like all the rest of the Rocky Mountains, almost all the populations are found in valleys that are between mountain ranges, the topography has determined where there's growth and where there's not. If you go to Idaho, Idaho is divided not north-south, but east and west. If you look at eastern Idaho, Rexburg, Idaho Falls, lovely places. I mean, truly lovely places, but the population's not growing as much and there's not as much money. The huge growth in Idaho has been in Boise and Coeur d'Alene, areas to the north. And by the way, it's not just Boise, it's the circle of cities around it, the Caldwell and Nampas and all that. That's where you consider going, and that's where the growth is. Once again, Boise is in a valley, and that keeps it a little bit warmer, by the way, than the eastern Idaho part, where, frankly, it's cold enough to die. If you were to look at Wyoming and are saying, where should I go in Wyoming? Let me just tell you a little secret. You see that little notch that was cut out of Utah? It was done by the federal government to punish Brigham Young. Whatever. But that is the part of Wyoming that is showing the most growth. Green River, Evanston, that is where the big growth is going on, right along the southern part of the state. Now, it's true, Cheyenne is in that southern part. Go to Wyoming, look only along the interstate in the southern part, and I think you're going to find this is a Rocky Mountain state that has some serious potential. But most of Wyoming is not. Now, let's go back over to Colorado. There is a major transportation road that goes right through Colorado Springs up to Denver and goes through Cheyenne, Wyoming. That is the key. People don't necessarily live up in the mountains as much as you might think. Yes, Denver's a mile-high city. I got that. And it does have snow and all that. But really, the population is primarily in the lowlands. And it is that area that shows the most growth. I'd throw in Pueblo into that group. Once again, it's not as though Colorado isn't a good place in and of itself. It is, actually. But you have to choose the neighborhood wisely, because there are lots of parts of any of these states, but especially Colorado, that you may lose your shirt because it's expensive to develop a practice and even to hire people. Now, let's talk Utah for just a second. Salt Lake City is the one that everybody knows about because that's where the interstates cross. But if you look north, up until Logan, if you follow the road down I-15, down from Logan down to Ogden, you'll hit Salt Lake City, and then you hit another very big growth rate, which is Provo and Orem, and of course, Lehigh. Now, you probably know, I moved out of California to Utah specifically because I saw a great deal of growth. But it's something I want you to understand, and don't mistake me here. It's not just growth. It's the cost of living. Now, some people are going to say, oh, this area is just way too full. But when you are having growth of 3 to 5% per year, that means that there's a lot of practice areas and potential patients who are going to be remarkably good for you to pick up in a brand new practice. It's not just a matter of saying, where do I go? Just tell me any old place that's growing. There's a lot of places that are growing. They will tend to follow the interstates, however. Now, Mike happens to live down in southern Utah, Cedar City, which is very close to St. George. Now, that whole area was is kind of like what Las Vegas and Palm Springs were, a big retirement community. And the area has developed really well. They've got universities, they've got a lot of housing that's very inexpensive. Plus, you can get down, as you'll notice, to Las Vegas very quickly. And a lot of people like being able to catch a show. It's just a couple of hours or an hour or so from Las Vegas to get up into southern Utah. Therefore, you kind of have the best of both worlds. The reason people are moving here, though, is because it's inexpensive to live. It's not that far from their home turf where they used to live, which is California. Now, let's talk about Nevada for a second. Nevada is really divided into east and west, and I consider Carson City and Reno to be in the western part, and Las Vegas, believe it or not, is in the east. However, it's much more associated with that other side. Las Vegas was a way station for troops who were going down to Los Angeles on the train, and it grew exponentially. Yes, the area had to go through a bit of the bad news in the recession in 2008, and housing prices went down. But what happened is they diversified their economy, allowed significant growth, and a lot of those people who were living in California then are saying, why don't I just go there? And once again, that's one of the places that you're going to find a very family-friendly environment. I know you're thinking, what are you, crazy? No, Las Vegas is a family-friendly environment. And it isn't just Summerlin either. It's North Las Vegas. It's Henderson. It's all the area in that region. Northern California has really contributed to what's going on in Reno and Carson City. Incline Village is almost so expensive up by Lake Tahoe that no one can afford it. So what people have done is gone down the hill from Incline Village, and they're looking at those areas. Now you may be saying, Scott, why are you telling me all this stuff about going to these Rocky Mountain states? Because if you want to find growth, if you want to find practices for sale, and you want to do startups, that's what this whole podcast and webinar thing is all about. It's to help you find locations that are going to work for you. Now, there are some tools that we do at Dr. Demographics that I want to reassure you about. One of them is a state briefing. Now, the state briefing, I basically narrate what's going on in the state, and I will provide you the demographic information, the key demographic information on every county and city in the state that you're looking at for $49. It's not the end, it's kind of a beginning of your search to start limiting your choices. Telephone consultations are really good when you say, here's what I am looking for. Now, if you happen to have family or you've been in a place, and I get a lot of calls for Utah. People say, well, I went to school in Utah, or I've got my grandparents live there. What's it like? I can tell you even by neighborhood on the phone, places that are going to show the most potential. The best science report is when we take a large geographic area, often multiple counties, and we'll say, if it was my money, here are 5 locations that I'd consider. That's what the best science report is all about. And if you find one location you're thinking, I really need to look at this one, especially to buy, the practice site viability report is the way to go. And yes, you can still get that discount of $49 with Miracle Max 49. Now, I'm telling you this because our goal right now is to try to inform members of the professions about where to go, to purchase or to start up, to evaluate. I'm not trying to tell you what works well for me. I want to help figure out what works for you. So our purpose in consultations is always to do that, to say what's the place that is going to work out best, what's going to give me the best leg up. And that's why we offer these services. Now, Mike, are you still monitoring our services here? Mike may have fallen asleep. He's been having problems with his internet, so I'm just going to let that go and explain just a couple of things as to why Mike went down to southern Utah and why I'm in northern Utah. It is really the idea of opportunity cost. It isn't as much that I think, oh my goodness, I just love the snow, because I'm a skier, but I'm not that fantastic a skier. Mike is a hunter, but let's not go crazy about that. But what you have the opportunity to do in founding a business and paying reasonable employees is significant. Now, as I mentioned, the cost of living and the cost of doing business, a lot of time that's taken up in your, your lease. I hate to say it, but the lease matters an awful lot. If you'll look at your bottom line, that is an important part of it. The second one is equally important, and that's how much you have to pay your employees to serve people. If you happen to be one of those people who find yourself paying $15 an hour for a person fresh out of high school, you may be having a problem because you're not necessarily getting great service from that individual. So what a lot of practices have done when they've gone to the locations, and I'll give you Seattle is something that I see this all the time, everybody wants to serve as much as possible, but they have to have as few staff people as possible. And therefore, the service suffers. And I only wish I could say that that isn't going to happen, but it is. When you can find a place that has a minimum wage, and most of the Rocky Mountain states are at $7.50, which is the federal minimum wage, you're able to do so many things that otherwise you can't do. I know everybody's crazy about having a fee-for-service type practice, but even then, a fee-for-service practice is a manifestation of a practice that the people can afford the services that you offer and are excited to utilize those services. That's what the bottom line here is. Now, next week, I'm kind of playing around with doing a couple of states. I want to ask some of those viewers what states they might be interested in themselves. But I'm trying to handle them in clusters. So I'm thinking about doing one which is going to be the Greater South, which is the Deep South, which would include North and South Carolina, Georgia, Northern Florida, Mississippi, and Alabama. I know people go, what? But I also want to talk about Louisiana. And I think next week that may be what we go with. Everybody, thank you so much for being with us today. I apologize for Mike, whose internet, like I said, probably died. But we don't hold that against him. He's a good man anyway. If we can help you, please go to drdemographics.com. Your friends and referrals are always welcome, and we look forward to talking to you again in the near future. Take care, and thanks for watching.